Meanwhile, some states, including Nevada, are suing the Trump administration over major cuts to the Department of Education. Democratic attorney generals from 20 states and the District of Columbia filed a lawsuit in federal court today. The suit alleges the administration is gutting the agency as a way to implement an unlawful plan to dismantle the department. On Tuesday, the Trump administration announced it's cutting nearly half of the department's staff. Roughly 1,300 employees were told they would be without their job in 90 days. President Trump has also proposed eliminating the Department of Education altogether.